Clothing hauls, makeup shopping sprees, and collecting Stanley cups. For a few years now, young people have been exposed to influencer culture, pushing them to buy the latest thing. But a trend gaining traction online is convincing them to buy almost nothing at all. I'm Anelise Borges, and this is The Stream.
On today's episode of I'm Rich, You're Poor, we're going to open your ice freezer with made-up ice. We're going to take it out of the freezer to put it back in the freezer and restock it. And this is some different shape ice, some pentagon ice, round ball ice. What was the first one? Coffee ice. Do you have coffee ice? No, you don't. Do you have round lover-shaped ice, chocolate ones? No, you don't.
My friends and I spent about $42,000 at a night out in Vegas.
Underconsumption core is about consuming less in everything and adopting a sense of thriftiness. All over TikTok, people are showing how they consume less by using items that they've had for several years and only purchasing things when necessary.
I just want to start this off by saying that this is no longer desirable to me.
Influencers used to share tips and tricks and the products they loved on the internet. But then companies got involved and the game changed. Through PR and paid sponsorships, the amount of stuff grew, and trust between said influencers and their audience began to fade. One of the consequences of that has been the emergence of a new trend that has online users rejecting the push to buy more. It's called underconsumption core. Today, we discuss the significance of the trend and whether it is here to stay with Diana Wiebe, a de-influencer who makes content actively discouraging people from shopping, Omar, a lecturer in marketing at Wilfrid Laurier University, and Katia Osei, a bioengineer and the lead researcher for the OR Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at tackling global fast fashion waste. Thank you all so much for your time. It's great to have you. Diana, I would like to start with you, if it's okay. Can you please run us through the meaning of what you do and why you decided to produce this kind of content?
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for having me. And I just want to start off by saying that, with influencer marketing, they're always trying to get you to buy something. And a lot of times the consumer of that content isn't going to see what's happening kind of behind closed doors with corporations really pushing people to buy more through influencer marketing. So, I started noticing those connections between even my own overconsumption too of skincare products. I was always wanting to buy something from one of my favorite creators that they were recommending. But then I realized, a lot of this stuff I wasn't using. It wasn't really worth it, in value to me. And that's when I started making my first garbage videos, is what I call them, where I was kind of just reacting to what I was seeing on social media and trying to spread a little more awareness that at the core of these videos, they're an advertisement.
And you do that really well with a really fun spin to it. Omar, we're obviously discussing one trend that invites us all to think about consuming less in an era where there's never been so much stuff. Take a look at this clip and then I'll get your reaction.
On today's episode of I'm Rich, You're Poor, look how many Stanley cups I have. Yes, I've got that many Stanley cups. I'm putting them on 5 different shelves on my wall. I've gone out and bought Stanley cups in all different colours, patterns, shades, and even branded ones and limited edition ones. Yes, you can get limited edition Stanley cups for upwards of £1,000. But I'm rich. I can afford to buy Stanley cups despite them being reusable cups. You can't even afford one Stanley cup, can you? You're sitting there sipping out your reusable cup that looks like a Stanley but comes from Primark, whilst I I've got Stanley cups in all different colors, despite them looking the same and doing the same thing. But I'm rich. I can afford to buy a Stanley. You can't. You're povo.
Right. So thinking about this trend, and you've, Omar, you've been observing changes in consumer behavior. Would you say underconsumption is a direct, I don't know, consequence or reaction from the years of overconsumption we've seen driven by content creators and influencers?
That's a key part of the story. So there are a few things happening here. Yes, post-COVID, we've seen kind of a significant shift to online consumption. With that came access to a lot more products and came a lot more interest. And then there was the idea of revenge buying that emerged after COVID. Now, what we're kind of dealing with is, yes, the idea of consumerism wasn't really that much appealing anymore. And so, yes, that's a part of the story. But another part of the story is the economic situation, rise in inflation. I would say that's more consistent than not worldwide. So the story is a little bit more complex, but part of it is that idea of getting tired, quite honestly, of over-consuming and showcasing social status with association with material.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact of the financial crisis around the world and the difficulties people are actually having in making ends meet. But it is very interesting what you said about just people feeling quite tired, like Diana was saying, of all these products being pushed at you and you realizing that you don't need them and they don't really work necessarily. Katia, I want to bring you in because you actually bring a very important aspect to this conversation in the work that you do with the OR Foundation. Can you first break it down for us? What does the foundation do and how does it relate to this new trend asking people to maximize the utility of their purchases?
Yeah, okay. Before I can really dive into the work we do at the OR, I feel like I have to explain the phenomenon that is waste colonialism. And I do want to stress that I don't use the word colonialism lightly. I feel like we've gotten to a point where we're almost desensitized to it. So I don't want to use that lightly. So I would like to give a little historical context.
Sure, please.
The truth of the matter is, as the fashion industry moves towards this fast fashion model, there's going to be more waste. They're creating this culture where we're treating clothes which aren't meant to be consumable as consumables. And so once you are done with the clothes, they have to go somewhere. And the thing about capitalism is that it's going to look for the path of least resistance. It's going to exploit the channels that have been left over by colonialism and figure out a way to ship these clothes somewhere and not have to pay for it, not have to deal with the waste. The reason that markets in Accra and retailers in this market have no way to really even negotiate for more power or more say in how much these clothes cost, what's going into these bales that are coming to Accra is because of this colonial dynamic. So yes, our foundation, our work is in whatever way to tackle this idea of waste colonialism from the different perspectives. So we're working on the ground to offer direct relief to the markets and the retailers affected, but we do also have some team members trying to tackle it from a policy point of view. So trying to make sure that these manufacturers are held responsible for their waste and these communities that are carrying the burden are well compensated for it.
And on that point, Katia, we have some numbers here because fast fashion is just one aspect of overconsumption and more than $500 billion are lost every year due to lack of recycling clothes we don't need. A large chunk of this waste comes from consumers, and this shows where they're spending the most. Countries in the global north, in the US and in the UK, are the biggest buyers of fast fashion. China and Japan are also not far behind. In comparison to Egypt, Brazil, India, and Vietnam, the gap in spending is actually growing. Katia, the reason why I say this is so important is because we're almost at a breaking point, right? Us and the planet. We can't really afford to go on like this. Would you say this context of underconsumption becomes the natural thing to gravitate towards?
Yeah, 100%. Of course, we do have to just change our relationship with things like clothes and plastic and all of that. But I feel like even more important, we do have to put more pressure on the manufacturers, because the reason there is culture of overconsumption is because they're able to overproduce and go unchecked. Once you're able to produce and have giant profit margins, you can just make as many clothes or plastic or whatever as you want without worrying about who's buying them. You just have to now invest more money into creating the culture that wants these clothes. So it really does start from the top, where if there weren't these many clothes with these many things being produced at the rate at which they're being produced, there wouldn't really be a need to manufacture this culture that consumes.
Thank you for bringing that up, because we're often shamed about buying so much and spending so much money in fast fashion. Diana, I want to share a clip that we found online alerting people about this need to buy so much, whether or not this is being manufactured. Take a look.
Instead of buying this to-go utensil kit, just wrap up the ones you already have. Before you go out running to buy a Stanley Cup, be so sure you don't have a water bottle already at home that can serve the same purpose. Instead of investing in these cheaply made plastic plates, thrift ones that will last longer and cost the same. Before buying one of these gimmicky products with 1 to 2 uses, ask yourself if this standard version of the product was really that inconvenient before seeing it. Instead of buying brand new plastic items that are just going to sit in a drawer, try reusing things you already have. These big box stores have more stuff than they even know what to do with, so this is your reminder that you don't need it. Okay, bye.
A reminder that you don't need it. Diana, what kind of reaction do you get to the content that you put out there? Are people receptive to the idea of shopping less?
Yeah, I do think most people are receptive to it. I think, like the pandemic brought a lot of this on, like we were still consuming a lot before the pandemic, but that's just kind of escalated it too, where people, out of whether it's fear or just boredom, they were looking to kind of, treat themselves in some sort of way. And I think a lot of people now that they're recognizing when something is an advertisement, they're like, yeah, I don't really feel this urge to buy this anymore because I know it for what it is. And I do think, too, there's a misconception sometimes that, as a singular person, your choices make no impact, where, compared to a corporation, obviously, yes. And I do think that there should be more pressure on corporations, but if we all consumed less collectively, that would make a difference.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Omar, you touched upon this at the start of the show, but I want to ask you about this point. Many people are raising on social media, criticizing the labeling of this behavior as a trend. Take a look.
This feels like a nod to the days when millennials were obsessed with minimalism, and it showed up in fashion, interior, and even UX and UI design. It was the result of many things, including the recession, and as we all know, history repeats itself. But this creator points out how it's just poverty repackaged, which is a good point. A lot of these videos just feel like an aestheticization of frugal living, but many people have always lived this way, like this is just the norm for a lot of people. But this trend doesn't seem to be the typical rich people pretending to be poor cliche. Instead, it just feels like more regular people trying to move away from overconsumption, just like last year with the whole de-influencing trend. And there's also an emphasis on making quality items last, because on platforms like TikTok, there's always this constant pressure to buy something.
Omar, your view on this, is this poverty repackaged?
A few things. I understand where this is coming from, actually. So this phenomena, underconsumption core, is not brand new. Maybe it's a bit rebranded, so there may be a rebranding element to it. But I would say this new rebrand comes in with a different shape that looks to me more like a consistent pattern, more so than a passing trend. So a trend is time-bound, a trend is limited. A pattern or a consistent pattern is something is here to stay. Now, the idea of frugality or minimalism, that has happened in the past, and that has kind of gathered a level of attention in the past. Usually, though, this is associated with periods of economic hardships or significant changes. So we see this in the 90s around, also we see this in the dot-com bubble. We see this 2008. So this is nothing in terms of the idea of spending less. That's not new.
Sure.
What's new, however, is we're able to do it and we're able to communicate with one another. And that almost creates this effect that makes us critically assess. Say, okay, let's actually talk about it. Where are clothes going after we use them? Where are they coming from? What are the conditions of workers? So all of this is repackaged in a different format, but this new repackaging appears to be more consistent. My colleagues and I have done the research on this, actually. We examined the YouTube data over the last 10 years, and specifically with fashion halls. And we've seen these questions emerge. We've seen a shift from this is very cool to how about the workers? How about the waste? So we've seen that shift.
And yet people are still, again, buying on, I don't know, Shein and Katia, we know that this generation might be struggling and they are exposed to increasingly cheap alternatives for, let's say, clothes, but at what cost? Do you agree with Omar that they are online and they are getting more information and are more aware about the impact their choices have?
Yeah, for sure. Just to add on to what you said, Omar, I feel like we've gotten to a point in history where information, both about the historical context, but about what's happening right now, is just so accessible in a way that it's never been before. So, and a lot of people do say Gen Z is less susceptible to propaganda. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but I do think we are the most equipped to be able to see through propaganda because we do have more of the facts, we do have more of the context, and we are seeing that shift in culture as a result. But we're also seeing the world change in such a fast way that we do have to change more than I also don't want to take too much responsibility off of the consumer because we do have that responsibility. But I feel like we need to call for more than just the cultural shift. We need to hold our lawmakers accountable, the manufacturers accountable, the investors accountable, because this is such a global problem. And it will take just so many years for us to change our relationship with clothes because it took us so many years for us to get here. Not even just clothes, just everything, that we just need something more rapid, something more drastic, in my opinion.
Absolutely. It's because it's really hard, right, not to connect the dots at this stage. Again, we are at a breaking point. The planet is a breaking point. We cannot go on like this. Omar, just one final thought on this particular point. You just mentioned that trends are normally time-bound. Would you say this particular one is here to stay? Is this a movement? Are we going to see a consistent shift towards something a little bit more mindful when it comes to how we consume?
It depends. So I will tell you what it depends on. Katia, I have some news for you that we may need to think about. So there's the idea in sustainable consumption known as the green gap or behavior intention gap. So we say we want to do stuff that we do. And the literature shows us now that we want to be more sustainable. We want to do more good, slow fashion, the whole bit. Okay. Now, when it comes to action, however, that action is lagging and there's the significant gap. So it depends if we can close this gap. Well, what does it depend on? One, financial literacy, being able to build budgets, strong budgets, being mindful that this idea of underconsumption is not necessarily about depriving oneself of everything. Rather, it's building a balance. So you need a healthy balance of consumption. That's important for the economy to thrive. So you need to spend. Now, the types of spending we need to think about, some on experiential, some on material items. So it depends. If we're able to build the healthy habits, the consistent, the sustainable habits that can take us over that long term, I think that's with us to stay. However, if this becomes one of those things where people truly get tired because the lifestyle with all what's going on around us is not sustainable, then I foresee more and more people will start abandoning this, which is not an ideal case, I would say.
You bring so many important points, and I want to ask Diane about whether or not she found this healthy balance in terms of how much she consumes. But before that, there are quite a few content creators online even suggesting how you can go about engaging in this movement and closing this gap between the actions, the thought and the action, as Omar was just saying. Take a look at this.
I decided I wanted to start participating in the PAN project because this is not normal.
If you don't know what Project PAN is,
let's say you have 5 lotions, you have to finish all 5 of those lotions before you can get more. A lot of us are very easily influenced. And in the year of 2025, I want to be better about my overconsumption. So this is why I'm choosing to participate in Project PAN. So let's go through. This is just perfumes and lotions. I'm worried. You can't even see it all, but I have so much just Sol de Janeiro. And I don't even like all these scents. And this is not including the body washes, the conditioner, the hair products I have from Sol de Janeiro too.
So, Diana, what about that healthy balance? I mean, we still like to buy things from time to time. We still like to treat ourselves to things. You were mentioning that. But did you manage to find a balance for yourself? And would you say that projects like Project PAN are a good way of going about trying to figure out a healthier way of consuming?
Yeah, I think for me, it really started with I realized like my consumption habits were pretty much directly tied in with how I was feeling mentally too. And I think mental health and getting that little boost of serotonin from buying something or like waiting for it to arrive on your doorstep is a real thing. And I think a lot of people are seeking that out right now. But for me, really began with consuming less because I was more focused on other aspects of my life. So like starting a hobby or, you know, getting somewhere further in my career, trying to fix the things where I was, you know, unhappy with things generally and doing something different about those. And I think I've seen waves of positivity with like de-influencing underconsumption. And I'd say even in America right now, a lot of people are having the conversation of, well, if you disagree on who's the president right now, you don't necessarily want to participate in the economy as much as possible too. So I do hope that it becomes more of a mindset for people and it just allows everyone to slow down with their consumption a little bit. Everyone has different levels of need, so it's important to remember that too. But I do think, you know, generally we can all normally consume better.
You almost opened the door to a whole new discussion there with politics and the President of the United States, but we're going to stick to this one because unfortunately we're almost out of time. Katia, for those of us who want to avoid being part of what you described rightly so, beautifully so, as waste colonialism, what would be your call to action today?
Yeah, I just think we all need to learn more. We all have to be aware of our position on the global stage and how much privilege we have in comparison to others. We all have to be aware, once again, of the propaganda and the tactics all these manufacturers are using to get us to buy these products, and be aware of the fact that once we're buying and producing waste, the waste has to go somewhere. If we're buying a shirt for $4, it probably means that whoever has made it is being paid way less than they should be, and the material being used is way cheaper than it should be. So I guess just doing the homework, being aware, but also listening into the people who are on the ground trying to fight it, whether this is legislators or de-influencers, and just trying to support in the little ways that we can. But I do want to stress the fact that we really do have to be aware of all the layers of the problem, because capitalism is rarely ever just capitalism. There's always something else lurking in the background and other channels being exploited that we just may not be aware of.
And once again, you are part of the War Foundation, a very important organization. Everyone that is watching us today can check your website to know how to contribute to that. Katia, Diana, and Omar, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being part of the stream today. And thank you all for tuning in. You can keep the conversation going online. You can use the hashtag or the handle AJStream and send us your questions and suggestions. Take care, and I'll see you soon.